Hey everyone! The online mobs and their ringleaders are at it again with their insistence that we can't read, watch, or otherwise listen to people without their approval. Last Friday, former radio host Jian Ghomeshi had an essay published in the New York Review of Books. This is a prestigious publication, so the jealousy rage is at its finest. The editor defended the publication by stating, as it turns out correctly, that he felt the subject of what it's like for a person to have their life turned upside down overnight and go from being a celebrity to a pariah would be an interesting subject. Interesting, indeed. The raging mob once raged about the fact that Jian had not been forced to speak at or after his own trial. Now that he's finally spoken, years later, they're asking why he was being allowed to speak. Some are saying that Jian should contact all of his alleged victims, while others are warning his alleged victims that they'll be traumatized just by hearing his name in the news. Now, Jian says in his essay, "My acquittal left my accusers and many observers profoundly unhappy. The reason for that is that his accusers were obliterated in court, unearthed for having pursued him in embarrassing ways, and busted for lying in court. Lying so profusely that many observers were left profoundly unhappy that the women weren't charged with perjury." And that's what these activists want to see happen again. The fact that Jian kept all of his communications, those pesky little emails that cleared him in court, actually became a new accusation of creepiness. The women who didn't go to the police expressed relief afterwards that they hadn't engaged in the process. Well, I bet they were relieved, because they didn't let their accusations be tested. Now they can still claim to be victims. Lucky them. These alleged victims should be very happy that Jian decided not to write an essay revealing all of the evidence he has against his accusers. One thing we can be sure of, he still has that evidence. I really don't think that's what these women want to see happen. Jian has offered an olive branch, and given what we saw happen when those emails come out, I strongly suggest that these so-called victims count their blessings, sit down, and shut up. That is my advice to these accusers. And don't go running to Jesse Brown, the original so-called journalist who broke the story. He's a known liar who's lost all credibility. Even in his attack piece on Jian's essay, he slipped up and confirmed inconvenient information. While claiming that Jian lied that the accusations started with one ex-girlfriend, Brown later admits that he checked in with the ex-girlfriend who was his original source. Now, Toronto Star reporter Kevin Donovan wrote a book about the investigation that Jesse Brown tried to keep him from publishing. See, it's not just Jian that Brown wants to keep quiet. In fact, Kevin Donovan's book confirms that there was only one ex-girlfriend who did her own investigation, and this one woman was the ex-girlfriend who fed Brown the story. Kevin Donovan was a bit nervous that the original women had already been colluding by the time she called Jesse Brown, but he published anyway. Donovan tells us that Jesse Brown was deeply concerned that he could be found liable for defamation, saying in his book, Brown, a tall and imposing man who always seemed to be breaking a sweat, had of course spoken to her before. Brown has denied any knowledge of who started a mysterious Twitter account, which first began posting serious allegations online. Just like Jian's essay says, rumors started circulating online. But Donovan made it clear that he could tell two of the women that they spoke to, the ex-girlfriend and another, were sharing this account. Now, Jesse Brown still claims this Twitter account as a separate accusation. It's my theory, pretty much because of how obvious it is, that Jesse Brown told this woman, this ex-girlfriend, to start the Twitter account so he could break the story with a headline that reads something like, "Anonymous Twitter account says Jian Ghomeshi punches women in the head," and then Jesse would be safe from a defamation suit. We should be very concerned when someone claiming to be a journalist can literally create the news he wants to report. And that is what happened. Jesse wants to report something libelous. He tells his source to tweet it so that he can report on the tweets. All evidence supports this sequence of events. The Twitter account started after Donovan says that Jesse Brown first heard from the woman, the ex-girlfriend, and it stops after Donovan says Toronto Star agreed to work with Jesse Brown. And this is how Jesse Brown built his legend as the victim whisperer. Do not go to Jesse Brown and Canadaland for facts. Jesse should be the one under investigation. At least Google recognizes that he doesn't count as a news source, and the rest of y'all need to figure that out very soon. Jesse Brown's fourth anonymous source turned out to be his good friend Catherine Burrell, with whom he did a podcast about a year earlier, laughing about how Catherine Burrell used to make fist-fucking jokes in the workplace. These are clips from that podcast.
You were like a bizarre rabid unicorn at the CBC. Like, you were so strange in that environment. You played by your own rules there in a way that would have gotten so many people fired instantly. It was like, she's incredibly inappropriate and foul-mouthed and sexual and just like culturally out of step, yet she's sort of like our most productive worker who books the most stuff and gets the most gets and writes the best copy. How could we get rid of her? And she's well liked, but there's like a liability issue of like what lawsuit is going to originate from this. And like, they were just like in a state of constant,
Did they really want to get rid of you,
about
or
what to,
like?
I don't think that anyone wanted to get rid of me. I mean, I definitely got like rapped on the knuckles for my behavior.
I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
I think you made people very, very nervous.
I think that
I don't think you ever had an enemy who was trying to get rid of you, and I can't say that about myself.
Right.
But I think you made people very nervous. It was just a complete culture clash of who you were and what that place was.
Yeah, I feel like I was doing a tightrope thing, possibly. But like, again, you know, I was also like very young. I started working at the CBC when I was like 23 years old. So like, what else? I was just doing what I thought was correct. And I don't know, again, like I feel like I definitely was without guile during those years. Like I wasn't planning to be like this crucial member of the CBC community who was, you know, making a terrible fist fucking joke in the middle of a story meeting and being like, this is my cred. Like, they can't fire me because who else is going to say this shit? I was just kind of like, I don't know.
Making it up as you went along.
I was making it up as I went along.
Yeah.
But like, as most of us are doing, I think, when we're in our early to mid-20s, when we have like the hubris of youth and...
So when Jian Ghomeshi apologized to Catherine Burrell in court, what he was apologizing for was not knowing that while she acted like a disgusting pig, he was not allowed to pretend it was funny by playing along with her shtick. Jian didn't realize that despite everyone telling him that he was one of the gang and part of the crew, he was actually a loathed other, that they were happy to make money from, but not happy to associate with. And that's why it's so important to read Jian's essay carefully. There are good, legitimate reasons that Jian didn't know he'd become toxic, because no one told him they didn't like him. Instead, he was surrounded by sycophants who wanted to use him for a dental plan and pretend to like the brown guy because he was the best meal ticket they had at the time. The question now is whether or not the public wants a real conversation based in truth, or if they want to be part of the mindless mob who can't figure out who is lying to them. Roll your dice. But remember, people will look back on this moment in history, and my phone is ringing every day with calls from people saying, I never thought this could happen to me.